Brooklyn had always been a dreamer. Growing up in a small Midwestern town, she spent countless hours staring out her bedroom window, imagining the adventures that awaited her beyond the endless cornfields and quiet streets. At 25, she had finally taken the leap and moved to New York City, determined to make her mark as a writer. The city was everything Brooklyn had imagined, bustling, vibrant, filled with possibility. But 6 months in, she was still struggling to find her footing. Her tiny studio apartment felt claustrophobic, her freelance writing gigs barely covered the rent, and the novel she dreamed of writing remained stubbornly unwritten. On particularly difficult days, Brooklyn found herself longing for the simplicity of her hometown, the comfort of family nearby. It was on one of those days that Brooklyn first met Asher. She had ducked into a small coffee shop to escape a sudden downpour, shaking the rain from her coat as she scanned the crowded space for an open seat. That's when she spotted him, tall and striking, with dark curly hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners as he smiled at something on his laptop screen. Without thinking, Brooklyn made her way over to his table. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "It's packed in here." Asher looked up, seeming startled for a moment before breaking into a wide grin. "Please be my guest," he said, moving some papers aside to make room. As Brooklyn settled in, pulling out her own laptop, she couldn't help sneaking glances at the handsome stranger across from her. There was something magnetic about him, an easy confidence that drew her in. When he caught her looking, she blushed and quickly averted her eyes. "I'm Asher, by the way," he said after a few minutes of companionable silence. "Brooklyn," she replied with a shy smile. "Nice to meet you, Asher." They fell into easy conversation, discovering they were both writers. Asher, a journalist for a major newspaper, Brooklyn, an aspiring novelist. Before they knew it, hours had passed, and the rain had long since stopped. As they reluctantly packed up their things to leave, Asher hesitated. "Listen, I know this might sound forward, but would you maybe want to grab dinner sometime?" he asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I'd love to hear more about your novel." Brooklyn's heart skipped a beat. "I'd like that," she said softly. They exchanged numbers, and she floated home on cloud 9, already daydreaming about their next encounter. Over the next few weeks, Brooklyn and Asher began seeing each other regularly. Their connection was immediate and intense. They could talk for hours about books, writing, their hopes and dreams. Asher was endlessly supportive of Brooklyn's novel, offering encouragement when she felt stuck and celebrating every small victory. For the first time since moving to New York, Brooklyn felt like she truly belonged. Asher introduced her to his eclectic group of friends, taking her to gallery openings and underground concerts. She started to see the city through new eyes, falling in love with its energy and possibility all over again. As summer turned to fall, Brooklyn and Asher's relationship deepened. They spent cozy weekends curled up in his apartment, reading to each other and working on their respective writing projects. Asher cooked elaborate meals while Brooklyn perched on the kitchen counter, stealing bites and peppering him with questions about his latest article. On a crisp October evening, they strolled hand in hand through Central Park, the trees a riot of red and gold. As they paused to admire the sunset over the lake, Asher turned to Brooklyn with an intensity that took her breath away. "I love you," he said simply, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think I've loved you since that first day in the coffee shop." Brooklyn's heart soared. "I love you too," she whispered, pulling him close for a kiss that left them both breathless. In that moment, everything felt perfect. Brooklyn had found her person, her home. She couldn't imagine anything ever coming between them, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when we least expect them. A few weeks later, Asher received news that would change everything. He had been offered his dream job as a foreign correspondent, reporting from conflict zones around the world. It was an incredible opportunity, one he had been working towards for years. But it would mean leaving New York and Brooklyn behind for months at a time. When Asher broke the news, Brooklyn felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. She was thrilled for him, of course. She knew how much this meant to his career. But the thought of being separated for so long, of trying to maintain their relationship across continents and time zones, filled her with dread. "We can make it work," Asher assured her, pulling her close. "I'll come back as often as I can, and we'll talk every day. This doesn't change how I feel about you, Brooklyn." Brooklyn wanted desperately to believe him, but as Asher threw himself into preparations for his departure, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The night before Asher left for his first assignment in Syria, they lay tangled together in his bed, neither wanting to fall asleep and hasten the inevitable goodbye. Brooklyn traced the lines of Asher's face with her fingertips, trying to memorize every detail. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Promise me you'll come back to me." Asher caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I promise," he said fiercely. "Nothing could keep me away from you." But as the weeks turned to months, Brooklyn found herself struggling to hold on to that certainty. At first, she and Asher talked every day, sharing the minutiae of their lives, despite the distance between them. But gradually, the calls became less frequent, the silences more pronounced. Asher was consumed by his work, witnessing horrors Brooklyn could scarcely imagine. When they did manage to connect, he seemed distant, preoccupied. Brooklyn threw herself into her writing, determined to finish her novel and make Asher proud. But the words that had once flowed so easily now felt stilted and forced. She missed the easy back and forth of bouncing ideas off Asher, the way he always seemed to know exactly what she was trying to say, even when she couldn't find the right words. As winter settled over New York, Brooklyn found herself feeling more alone than ever. She tried to stay busy, picking up extra freelance work and forcing herself to socialize with friends. But everywhere she went, she saw reminders of Asher, the coffee shop where they first met, the park where he told her he loved her. The city that had once felt so full of possibility now seemed cold and indifferent. It was on a particularly bleak February evening that Brooklyn hit her breaking point. She had just gotten off a frustrating phone call with Asher, cut short by spotty reception and the sound of distant explosions. Overcome with worry and loneliness, she found herself dialing a familiar number before she could think better of it. "Mom?" she said when the line connected, her voice small and choked with tears. "I think I made a mistake. I want to come home." The next morning, Brooklyn woke with a sense of resolve. She spent the day packing up her tiny apartment, donating most of her meager possessions, and shipping the rest back to her parents' house in Ohio. She fired off a quick email to Asher, not trusting herself to have the conversation over the phone. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I can't do this anymore. I hope you find what you're looking for." As her taxi pulled away from the curb, Brooklyn allowed herself one last look at the city she had once loved so fiercely. A part of her knew she was running away, giving up on her dreams, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this chapter of her life had come to an end. It was time to go home and start over. Back in Ohio, Brooklyn slowly began to rebuild her life. She moved back in with her parents, taking a job at the local library to make ends meet. In the quiet evenings after work, she started writing again, not the novel she had struggled with in New York, but something new, raw, and honest. Months passed, and gradually Brooklyn began to feel like herself again. She reconnected with old friends, rediscovering the simple pleasures of small-town life. And though she still thought of Asher often, the sharp pain of their separation had dulled to a bittersweet ache. It was on a warm summer evening, almost a year to the day since she had left New York, that Brooklyn's carefully reconstructed world was once again turned upside down. She was closing up the library, lost in thought as she straightened chairs and reshelved books. The sound of the door opening startled her. She was sure she had locked it. "I'm sorry, we're closed," she called out, not looking up from her task. "Brooklyn." The sound of that achingly familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, she turned around. Asher stood in the doorway, looking travel-worn and uncertain. His hair was longer than she remembered, his face leaner and more weathered. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had first captivated her in that crowded coffee shop, were exactly the same. "Asher," Brooklyn breathed, her heart pounding. What are you doing here? He took a tentative step towards her. I came to find you, he said simply. I should have done it months ago, but I was scared. Scared that you wouldn't want to see me, that I had ruined everything between us. Brooklyn felt rooted to the spot, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. How did you know where to find me? She managed to ask. Asher smiled ruefully. I may have done a little investigative journalism, he admitted. Called your parents pretending to be an old college friend, that sort of thing. I hope you don't mind. Despite herself, Brooklyn felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It was so quintessentially Asher, she couldn't help but be charmed. But the memory of those long, lonely months quickly sobered her. Why now? She asked, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. It's been almost a year, Asher. I thought you had forgotten about me. Asher's face crumpled at her words. In 2 quick strides, he closed the distance between them, reaching for her hands. Brooklyn let him take them, feeling the familiar warmth of his touch. Forget you. Brooklyn, that would be impossible, he said earnestly. You were with me every step of the way, even when we were apart. I saw your face in every sunset, heard your laugh in every moment of joy. But I was too caught up in my own ambition, too afraid to admit that I had made a mistake in leaving. He took a deep breath, seeming to steel himself for what he was about to say next. I quit my job, he said. I realized that no story, no career advancement was worth losing you. I want a life with you, Brooklyn, if you'll have me. Brooklyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had imagined this moment so many times over the past year, but the reality of it was almost too much to bear. I don't know, Asher, she said hesitantly. So much has changed. I've changed. How do I know you won't leave again? Asher squeezed her hands gently. Because I've learned my lesson, he said. I know now that home isn't a place, it's a person, and you, Brooklyn, are my home. Wherever you are is where I want to be. Brooklyn searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but all she saw was love, pure and unwavering. Slowly, she felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. Okay, she whispered, a smile breaking across her face like the sun emerging from behind clouds. Okay. Asher pulled her close, kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and giddy, Brooklyn couldn't help but laugh. So what now? She asked, gesturing around the quiet library. Are you really ready for small-town life? Asher grinned, that familiar mischievous glint in his eye. I was thinking we might compromise, he said. I heard Cincinnati has a pretty good writing scene, big enough to chase our dreams, small enough to put down roots. What do you say? Brooklyn pretended to consider for a moment, but they both knew her answer was never in doubt. I say, let's write our next chapter together. As they left the library hand in hand, stepping out into the warm summer night, Brooklyn felt a sense of excitement and possibility she hadn't experienced since those first heady days in New York. But this time, it was tempered with a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. She and Asher had weathered the storm of separation and come out stronger for it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as Brooklyn and Asher prepared for their move to Cincinnati. They found a cozy apartment in a vibrant neighborhood, close to cafes and bookstores, where they could while away the hours writing. Brooklyn finished her novel, drawing on the emotional journey of the past year to infuse her words with new depth and maturity. Asher, true to his word, took a job with a local magazine that allowed him to pursue meaningful stories without the constant travel of his previous position. As they settled into their new life together, Brooklyn marveled at how different things felt from that first flush of romance in New York. Their love had been tested, refined by distance and heartache, but rather than diminishing it, the challenges they had faced had only made their bond stronger. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Sometimes Brooklyn would wake in the night, gripped by the irrational fear that Asher would be gone, that their reunion had been nothing more than a beautiful dream. But then she would feel the solid warmth of him beside her, hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, and know that this was real. They were really building a life together, one day at a time. Asher, for his part, seemed determined to make up for lost time. He was endlessly patient with Brooklyn's occasional bouts of insecurity, always ready with a reassuring word or gesture. He threw himself into their shared life with enthusiasm, dragging Brooklyn to quirky local events and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. "We're explorers," he would say with a grin, "discovering our new home together." And slowly but surely, Cincinnati began to feel like home. They made friends with other young creatives in the city, hosting dinner parties and impromptu writing workshops in their cozy apartment. Brooklyn found a literary agent who fell in love with her novel, setting in motion the long-dreamed-of process of publication. Asher's articles for the magazine began attracting attention, earning him accolades and opportunities for bigger stories. But more than any external measure of success, it was the quiet moments that Brooklyn treasured most. Lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the paper in bed, trading sections back and forth. Evening walks along the Ohio River, planning their future as the sun set in a blaze of colour. The way Asher's face lit up when she read him a particularly good passage from her latest writing, or how he would absent-mindedly reach for her hand as they sat side by side, working on their respective projects. As the months turned to years, Brooklyn and Asher's love continued to deepen and evolve. They faced challenges, of course, tight deadlines, creative blocks, the occasional argument over whose turn it was to do the dishes. But through it all, they remained each other's biggest supporters and fiercest advocates. On their third anniversary, Asher surprised Brooklyn with a weekend getaway to a picturesque bed and breakfast in the countryside. As they strolled through sun-dappled woods, he suddenly dropped to one knee, producing a ring that glittered in the dappled light. "Brooklyn," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the best thing that's ever happened to me. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Brooklyn's eyes as she nodded emphatically. "Yes," she managed to choke out, "1,000 times yes." As Asher slipped the ring onto her finger, Brooklyn felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, with the person she was meant to be with. All the twists and turns of their journey had led them to this perfect moment. In the years that followed, Brooklyn and Asher built a life filled with love, laughter, and creative fulfillment. Brooklyn's novel became a bestseller, touching readers around the world with its honest portrayal of love and loss. Asher's journalism career flourished, allowing him to shed light on important issues while still coming home to Brooklyn each night. They bought a charming old house and filled it with books, art, and the warm glow of their shared love. Brooklyn and Asher's home became a sanctuary, a place where creativity flourished and dreams took flight. The walls echoed with laughter and animated discussions as they hosted dinner parties for fellow writers and artists, their living room often transforming into an impromptu salon where ideas flowed as freely as the wine. As the years passed, their love deepened and matured like a fine vintage. They faced challenges together, the stress of deadlines, the occasional creative block, the ups and downs of the publishing world. But through it all, they remained each other's staunchest supporters and fiercest critics, pushing each other to grow and evolve as writers and as people. Brooklyn's career soared to new heights with each book she published. Her novels, known for their raw emotional honesty and vivid characters, touched readers around the world. Asher too found success in his journalism, earning accolades for his insightful reporting on social issues. They celebrated each other's triumphs as if they were their own, their pride in one another a testament to the strength of their bond. Their home became a testament to their journey together. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with dog-eared favourites and signed first editions. Framed covers of Brooklyn's novels hung alongside Asher's most impactful articles. A large corkboard in their shared office was covered with notes, quotes and snippets of inspiration, a visual representation of their intertwined creative lives. On quiet evenings, they would often sit on their back porch, watching the sun set over the city they had both once dreamed of conquering. Brooklyn would lean her head on Asher's shoulder, marvelling at how far they had come from that rainy day in a crowded coffee shop. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if we hadn't met that day?" she asked one such evening, her voice soft with contemplation. Asher smiled, pulling her closer. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I realized that no matter what path we took, I believe we would have found each other eventually. Some loves are just meant to be. As they approached their 10th wedding anniversary, Brooklyn and Asher decided it was time for a new adventure. They had always talked about starting a family, but the timing had never felt quite right. Now, with their careers established and their love stronger than ever, they felt ready to embrace the challenges and joys of parenthood. The journey wasn't easy. Months of trying turned into years, and they faced the heartbreak of infertility together. There were moments of despair, of questioning whether this dream would ever become a reality. But through it all, their love for each other never wavered. If anything, the struggle brought them even closer, their shared pain forging an even deeper bond between them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, they received the news they had been longing for. Brooklyn was pregnant. The day she told Asher, his eyes filled with tears of joy. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around their living room as they both laughed and cried. The months that followed were a whirlwind of excitement and preparation. They transformed their spare room into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and filling it with books. Of course, Asher would often find Brooklyn sitting in the rocking chair, reading aloud to her growing belly, her voice full of love and anticipation. When their daughter, Aria, was born on a crisp autumn morning, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter in their love story. She had Brooklyn's dark curls and Asher's warm brown eyes, and from the moment they held her, they knew their lives would never be the same. Parenthood brought new challenges and joys to their relationship. Sleepless nights and diaper changes tested their patience, but the sight of Aria's first smile, her first steps, her first words, made every moment of exhaustion worth it. They marveled at how their love, which they had thought couldn't possibly grow stronger, expanded to encompass this tiny being they had created together. As Aria grew, so did their family's adventures. They took her on trips around the world, instilling in her the same love of exploration and storytelling that had brought them together. Their home, once filled with the quiet intensity of two writers at work, now rang with the laughter and chatter of a curious child discovering the world. Brooklyn found new inspiration in motherhood, penning a series of children's books that quickly became bestsellers. Asher, too, found his writing evolving, his perspective deepened by the experience of fatherhood. They continued to support each other's careers, taking turns with childcare and deadlines, always making sure that their family remained their top priority. On Aria's 5th birthday, as they watched her blow out the candles on her cake, surrounded by friends and family, Brooklyn and Asher exchanged a look of pure contentment. They had built this life together, brick by brick, word by word, love by love. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Later that night, after Aria had been tucked into bed with a new story, Brooklyn and Asher sat on their back porch, just as they had done countless times before. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the dreams that had brought them together all those years ago. "You know," Brooklyn said, intertwining her fingers with Asher's, "I used to think that falling in love was the most exciting part of a relationship, but now I realize that staying in love, choosing each other every day, that's the real adventure." Asher nodded, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "And what an adventure it's been," he replied, his voice full of warmth. "I can't wait to see where it takes us next." As they sat there, wrapped in the comfort of their shared history and the excitement of their future, Brooklyn thought about the story of their love. It wasn't always perfect, it wasn't always easy, but it was theirs. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The years continued to pass, bringing with them new joys and challenges. Aria grew into a bright, curious teenager with her mother's creativity and her father's passion for justice. Brooklyn and Asher watched with pride as she began to forge her own path, her determination reminding them of their younger selves. Their careers continued to evolve. Brooklyn, inspired by her experiences as a mother, branched out into writing young adult novels that tackled complex issues with sensitivity and insight. Asher, driven by a desire to make a difference, focused his journalism on environmental issues. his powerful reporting helping to drive real change. As they entered their 50s, Brooklyn and Asher found themselves facing a new chapter in their lives. With Arya preparing for college, they began to contemplate what their next adventure might be. They had always dreamed of living abroad for a while, immersing themselves in a new culture and finding fresh inspiration for their writing. After much discussion and planning, they decided to take a sabbatical year in Italy. They rented out their beloved home and found a small apartment in Florence, a city they had both always longed to explore more deeply. The year in Florence was transformative. They wandered through ancient streets hand in hand, marveling at the art and architecture that surrounded them. They learned Italian, stumbling through conversations with locals and laughing at their mistakes. They wrote in cafes, inspired by the beauty and history that permeated every corner of the city. Being away from the familiar routines of their life in New York allowed them to rediscover each other in new ways. Without the pressures of deadlines and daily responsibilities, they found a renewed sense of playfulness in their relationship. They stayed up late talking about their dreams and fears, just as they had done when they first fell in love. As their year abroad came to an end, Brooklyn and Asher realized that while they had loved their time in Italy, their hearts belonged in New York. They returned home with a renewed appreciation for the life they had built together and a fresh perspective on what truly mattered to them. Back in their familiar surroundings, they threw themselves into new projects with enthusiasm. Inspired by their time abroad, they started a writing workshop for underprivileged youth, sharing their love of storytelling with a new generation. It was challenging work, but deeply rewarding, and they found great joy in nurturing young talents. As they approached their 30th wedding anniversary, Brooklyn and Asher decided to renew their vows. The ceremony was intimate, held in the backyard of the home they had shared for so many years. Surrounded by their closest friends and family, including a beaming Arya home from college, they reaffirmed their love and commitment to each other. During the reception, as they swayed together on the makeshift dance floor, Brooklyn looked up at Asher, her eyes shining with love and contentment. "You know," she said softly, "when I was young, I used to dream about finding a love like this. But the reality is so much better than anything I could have imagined." Asher smiled, pulling her closer. "That's because we wrote this story together," he replied, "and we're still writing it every day." As the party continued around them, Brooklyn and Asher remained in their own world, lost in the dance and in each other. They had faced challenges, weathered storms, and come out stronger. Their love had grown and changed over the years, but at its core, it remained as true and steady as it had been on that rainy day in a New York coffee shop. Looking towards the future, they knew there would be more challenges to face. The world was changing rapidly, and they were no longer the young, invincible dreamers they had once been. But they faced the unknown with confidence, knowing that whatever life threw their way, they would face it together. Their story was far from over. There were still books to be written, adventures to be had, and love to be shared. And as they danced under the stars in their backyard, surrounded by the life they had built together, Brooklyn and Asher knew that the best chapters were yet to come.